Breakfast wasn't always cereal from a box or coffee on the go. Once, it was a masterpiece: golden eggs on toast, bubbling casseroles, even sherbet floats. These weren't just meals, they were memories. Today, we're unlocking the lost breakfasts America has forgotten. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share your memories in the comments, and subscribe for more nostalgic food stories. Eggs a la goldenrod. Breakfast wasn't always just a routine. It was a performance, a memory, a moment that lingered long after the plates were cleared. And few dishes captured that better than the elegant eggs a la goldenrod. If you grew up in a mid-century American kitchen, tucked away in the drawer might have been a well-worn Betty Crocker cookbook, and within its pages, this recipe shone like a little treasure map to the perfect morning. This wasn't your ordinary eggs on toast. No, this was breakfast turned into art. The process began with something simple: hard-boiled eggs. But the magic was in the way they were transformed. The firm whites were chopped finely and folded into a creamy, velvety white sauce. That sauce was spooned generously over hot, crisp toast until every inch was covered in rich comfort. And then came the show-stopping finale. The bright golden yolks were pressed through a sieve or crumbled by hand, sprinkled across the top like confetti at a parade. It was a dish that invited you to pause. The crunch of toast beneath the spoon, the soft bite of egg whites in the sauce, the sunny sparkle of yolk against the pale backdrop. Seasoned simply with salt and pepper, it carried all the warmth and care of a homemade meal. It wasn't just food. It was love plated with intention. In the 1940s and 50s, this dish wasn't considered fancy, but it was certainly special. It represented thrift, creativity, and the belief that presentation mattered, even on an ordinary morning. Families passed it down, mothers teaching daughters, grandmothers serving it proudly to company. But somewhere along the way, it slipped quietly from our tables, overshadowed by faster, packaged breakfasts. Today, we remember it not just for the flavor, but for the memory it carries, the kind of breakfast that turned a simple morning into a golden one. So tell me, have you ever heard of eggs a la goldenrod? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Cream chipped beef on toast, SOS. Not every forgotten breakfast came from comfort. Some were born out of hardship, yet somehow found their way into America's heart. One of the most enduring examples? Cream chipped beef on toast. Known to soldiers as SOS, this dish carried a reputation, a story, and a surprising amount of warmth. Its origins go back to wartime kitchens, when ration books dictated what families could and couldn't serve. Fresh meat was scarce, but dried beef, thin, salty slices sold in jars or packets, was affordable and long-lasting. Mothers and mess hall cooks alike found ways to make the most of it. The result was chipped beef, shredded into ribbons, folded into a simple cream sauce, and ladled over toast. It didn't look glamorous, but in those years, it wasn't about glamour. It was about survival dressed up as comfort. The sauce, thickened with flour, milk, and butter, smoothed out the toughness of the beef. A dash of pepper gave it a gentle kick, while the buttered toast below soaked up every bit of that silky mixture. To soldiers, it was filling fuel for long days. To families back home, it was proof that thrift could still taste like love. Over time, the dish softened. The military nickname SOS stuck, though home cooks reimagined it as something gentler. In suburban kitchens of the 40s and 50s, chipped beef on toast became Saturday breakfast, or even a quick supper when budgets were tight. Kids might not have known its history, but they knew the smell of butter and pepper filling the kitchen meant something hot and hearty was on the way. Today, it's rarely seen outside of vintage cookbooks and memory. But for those who lived through it, chipped beef on toast wasn't just food, it was resilience on a plate. Have you ever tried or even heard of this wartime classic? Let me know in the comments. Share this with someone who remembers SOS. and subscribe for more forgotten breakfasts that kept America going through the toughest of time. Classic meatloaf for breakfast. When we think of breakfast today, meatloaf isn't the first dish that comes to mind. But in mid-century America, when nothing was wasted and every meal stretched as far as possible, meatloaf often reappeared on the breakfast table, warmed in a skillet, topped with a fried egg, or tucked between slices of thick bread. It wasn't strange. It was tradition. Meatloaf had become a household staple in the 1940s and 50s. A single pound of ground beef could be mixed with breadcrumbs, onions, and eggs, then baked into a loaf large enough to feed a family for days. Dinner offered the first slices, juicy, topped with a ketchup glaze or tomato sauce. But the next morning was where the magic happened. Leftover slices, fried until crisp at the edges, carried a smoky richness that paired perfectly with toast, eggs, or even a glass of milk. Families leaned on it the way we lean on coffee today. It was dependable, filling, and affordable, a dish that stretched hard-earned dollars without ever feeling meager. For farm families, a meatloaf breakfast meant strength for the chores ahead. For suburban households, it meant a quick and hearty meal before school or work. And for children, it meant the comfort of something familiar, reheated but no less loved. What made it special wasn't the ingredients. It was the rhythm of a household that knew how to make yesterday's supper feel brand new. The golden crust that formed in the skillet, the savory aroma drifting from the stove, the warmth of knowing nothing went to waste. Today, meatloaf is still remembered as a classic dinner, but its role as breakfast has nearly disappeared. Yet for those who grew up with it, the memory of that hearty morning plate remains unforgettable. Would you try meatloaf for breakfast today? Drop your answer in the comments. Share this memory with someone who grew up in that era, and don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten breakfasts that once shaped American mornings. Macaroni and cheese for breakfast. Before the blue box of instant macaroni and cheese became a pantry staple, this dish lived in ovens, not microwaves. In the Betty Crocker era, it wasn't just dinner. It was sometimes breakfast, too. Imagine waking up to the smell of cheddar melting, breadcrumbs toasting, and a casserole dish bubbling in the oven. For mid-century families, macaroni and cheese was comfort, abundance, and yes, a perfectly acceptable way to start the day. The classic version was simple but full of love. Elbow macaroni cooked just right, layered with shredded cheddar, then drenched in a homemade white sauce. Once assembled, it went into the oven until the top turned golden, the edges browned, and the cheese bubbled through every layer. If you were lucky, a scattering of buttered breadcrumbs crisped on top, adding crunch before you hit the creamy center. Leftovers rarely sat idle. In the morning, cold squares of baked mac and cheese were slid into a hot skillet, reheated until the edges crisped. Sometimes it was served with sliced tomatoes, sometimes with just a glass of milk. But always, it carried the same message. This was food that made a house feel like home. Post-war America treasured it because it represented plenty. Cheese was no longer rationed, milk was plentiful, and pasta stretched every ingredient further. A pan of macaroni and cheese was proof that things were getting better. And for children, waking up to it on the table felt like a treat. Warm, gooey, filling, and just a little indulgent. Today, macaroni and cheese remains beloved, but its place at the breakfast table has all but vanished. Still, for those who remember, it was more than pasta and cheese. It was joy served in a casserole dish, waiting on the table at sunrise. So tell me, would you eat mac and cheese for breakfast? Share your thoughts in the comments. Pass this story along to someone who remembers, and be sure to subscribe for more forgotten breakfasts from America's past. Fruit float with sherbet. Not every breakfast of the past was hearty or heavy. Some were playful, colorful, and felt more like a celebration than a meal. One of the most cheerful, forgotten breakfasts of mid-century America was the fruit float with sherbet. Imagine waking up to a tall glass or bowl filled with fruit, fizzing with bubbles, crowned by a scoop of melting rainbow sherbet. For many kids, this wasn't just breakfast, it was magic. The recipe was delightfully simple. Sliced bananas, juicy orange segments, maybe a bit of crushed pineapple were layered into a glass dish. Then came the sparkle. Ginger ale, poured carefully until the bubbles danced around the fruit, tickling the surface and releasing a citrusy aroma. And just when you thought it couldn't get any more exciting, a scoop of sherbet, often rainbow, sometimes orange, was dropped on top. Slowly, it softened into the ginger ale, creating a frothy, fizzy crown. It wasn't health food, and it wasn't meant to be. This was joy food. Mothers made it for birthdays, for Saturday mornings when they wanted something fun, or for sleepovers when children woke up expecting a treat. It was sweet, tangy, fizzy, and refreshing all at once. The kind of dish that made kids giggle and adults smile. In the 1950s, recipes like this were celebrated in pamphlets and magazines. They weren't about nutrition charts or calorie counts. They were about creating memories around the breakfast table, making an ordinary morning feel extraordinary. Over time, as boxed cereals and frozen waffles filled the pantry, dishes like the fruit float faded into the past. But for those who remember it, the bubbles in the glass and the melting sherbet on top remain symbols of a childhood where breakfast could feel like a party. Would you try a fruit float in the morning today? Share your answer in the comments. Send this memory to someone nostalgic for the 50s, and don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten breakfasts that once made morning. Candle salad. Some forgotten breakfasts weren't about taste alone. They were about spectacle. Few dishes captured that spirit better than the quirky mid-century favorite known as candle salad. To modern eyes, it looks more like a prank than a meal, but for families in the 1950s, it was colorful, creative, and unforgettable. The recipe was as simple as it was surprising. Start with a bed of crisp lettuce on a plate. Place a round of canned pineapple in the center, its golden ring acting as the base. Then, a peeled banana stood tall in the middle, balanced upright, crowned with a bright red cherry. Sometimes, the finishing touch was a drizzle of mayonnaise or a dollop of whipped cream. Yes, you heard that right. Mayo at breakfast. For children, the presentation was funny, whimsical, and instantly memorable. They laughed at the sight of a banana candle flickering with a cherry flame. For parents, it was a clever way to get kids to eat fruit while adding a splash of color to the table. And for hostesses flipping through home economics booklets, candle salad was a guaranteed conversation starter, proof that presentation mattered just as much as flavor. In many homes, candle salad wasn't an everyday dish, but a special surprise, often appearing when company stayed the night or on a weekend when mothers wanted to serve something unique. It was playful food, the kind that made kids talk about breakfast all day long. Today, it seems quirky, even laughable, yet that's exactly why it remains unforgettable. Candle salad reflects a time when meals weren't just about filling plates, but about sparking joy and conversation. It reminds us that food can be fun, even silly, and sometimes those are the dishes we remember most. Would you have smiled if candle salad showed up on your breakfast table? Share your thoughts in the comments. Pass this story along to a friend who loves vintage recipes. And don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten breakfasts that once lit up America's morning. Jolly breakfast ring. Some breakfasts of the past weren't meant to be quick or ordinary. They were designed to impress. One of the most beautiful forgotten dishes of the Betty Crocker era was the Jolly breakfast ring. More centerpiece than side, it wasn't just food. It was decoration, celebration, and hospitality baked into a single dish. The ring was essentially a soft, cake-like bread baked in a circular mold until golden brown. But what made it special was the crown at its center. Jewel-bright candied or maraschino cherries that gleamed like little rubies in the morning sunlight. When it emerged from the oven, the smell was irresistible, sweet, buttery, with just a hint of citrus. A glaze brushed across the top gave it a shine that caught the light, making the whole table feel brighter. Every slice was a little surprise. The crumb was tender, sometimes flecked with bits of dried fruit, sometimes kept plain to let the cherries stand out. The texture was soft, almost cake-like, with just enough sweetness to feel indulgent without being overwhelming. Served with coffee, tea, or a cold glass of milk, it made breakfast feel like a holiday. For many homemakers in the 1950s, the Jolly Breakfast Ring was a way to show pride in presentation. Company staying the night? You could serve this in the morning and be certain it would leave an impression. It was the kind of dish that looked as beautiful as it tasted, the kind that said, "You're welcome here, and you're worth the effort." Over time, as convenience foods replaced elaborate baking, the Jolly Breakfast Ring slipped into obscurity. Yet it remains a shining reminder of when breakfast wasn't just eaten, but celebrated. Would you enjoy waking up to a cherry-crowned breakfast ring? Tell me in the comments. Share this memory with someone who loves vintage recipes. And don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten breakfasts that once brought joy to America's tables. Script: Sandwich Loaf. If you've never seen one before, the sandwich loaf might sound like a joke. A layer cake made of bread, frosted not with icing, but with cream cheese. Yet in mid-century America, it was a true showstopper. And yes, sometimes even a breakfast. The process began with stacked layers of soft white bread, trimmed neatly into a loaf shape. Each layer was spread with a different savory filling. Chicken salad on one tier, egg salad on the next, maybe ham or tuna spread in between. Once assembled, the whole loaf was frosted in a smooth, creamy cheese mixture, often tinted pastel with food coloring to look even more festive. Chilled overnight, it sliced beautifully, each cut revealing stripes of color and texture like a surprise waiting inside. While it showed up most often at luncheons, showers, and holiday gatherings, the sandwich loaf often made its way onto the breakfast table the next morning. Leftover slices, cold and creamy, were placed on toast or eaten as they were. For families, it was company food, day two, still elegant, still impressive, but now casual enough for a quick meal. The appeal wasn't just taste, it was spectacle. Guests would gasp when the first slice was revealed, a little ceremony of forks and chatter around the table. Children loved the colors, adults admired the creativity, and homemakers proudly showcased their skill in turning everyday ingredients into something extraordinary. Over the decades, the sandwich loaf quietly disappeared. It was too labor-intensive, too unusual for modern tastes. Today, it survives mostly in vintage cookbooks and the memories of those who once sliced into its creamy layers with delight. Would you try a frosted sandwich loaf for breakfast? Let me know in the comments. Share this nostalgic gem with a friend, and be sure to subscribe for more forgotten breakfasts that once turned the table into a celebration. Tuna casserole with crushed cracker. Long before boxed cereals and frozen waffles filled the shelves, casseroles often found their way onto America's breakfast tables. One of the most reliable and comforting of these was the tuna casserole with crushed crackers. It wasn't fancy, it was practical. But in the 1940s and 50s, practicality was often the heart of comfort. The recipe began with simple, affordable staples: cooked noodles, a can of tuna, a splash of milk, and sometimes a handful of peas if the pantry allowed. Everything was layered into a dish, bound together with a creamy sauce. But the true signature was the topping: crushed saltine crackers mixed with butter, spread across the top before baking. In the oven, they transformed into a golden crust that crackled when tapped with a fork. At dinner, it was filling, frugal, and family-friendly. But the next morning, leftovers often became breakfast. Cold squares were reheated in a skillet until the cracker topping re-crisped, releasing that buttery aroma once again. Paired with a glass of milk or sliced tomatoes on the side, it became a hearty, no-nonsense way to start the day. For farm families, It gave strength for chores. For city households, it stretched the grocery budget while still feeling satisfying. Post-war America valued dishes like this because they made something out of almost nothing. Tuna casserole didn't pretend to be glamorous, but it carried the spirit of thrift and resilience. Every bite was soft, warm, salty, and comforting, the kind of food that lingered in memory long after the plates were cleared. Today, tuna casserole is rarely thought of as breakfast, but for a generation that grew up with it, those skillet-warmed squares remain a reminder of how creative families once were with the ingredients they had. Mock chicken salad. Sometimes, breakfast wasn't about what you wanted, it was about what you had. During the Great Depression and through the rationing years of World War II, real chicken wasn't always easy to come by. Families got creative, and out of that creativity came the thrifty, filling dish known as mock chicken salad. The idea was simple. Take affordable ingredients that mimicked the flavor and texture of chicken. Crumbled hard-boiled eggs, mashed chickpeas, or even diced bologna became the base. A little mayonnaise, chopped celery, onion, and seasoning pulled it all together. Spread between slices of bread or served on a bed of lettuce. It looked and tasted close enough to chicken salad that many families embraced it without complaint. For breakfast, it became a smart, protein-packed option. A thick slice of bread topped with mock chicken salad made a quick meal before school or work. Paired with fruit or milk, it was hearty enough to carry families through the morning. Children often didn't know they weren't eating real chicken. It was simply salad, and it filled their stomachs. The beauty of mock chicken salad was its adaptability. Some households used leftover roast vegetables. Others added crushed crackers for texture, and a few recipes even leaned on peanut butter for richness. It was less about exact ingredients and more about stretching what little was available. By the 1950s, when prosperity returned and real chicken became easier to buy, the dish faded from breakfast tables. Yet for those who grew up in leaner times, it carried powerful memories of resilience, resourcefulness, and mothers who could make something out of almost nothing. Would you try a Depression-era mock chicken salad for breakfast? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with a friend who loves history through food. And don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten breakfasts that tell the story of survival and creativity in American kitchens. Would you try a Depression-era mock chicken salad for breakfast? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with a friend who loves history through food. And don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten breakfasts that tell the story of survival and creativity in American kitchens.